Hello guys, this is your friend. We are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto became the ultimate shinobi under Kakashi, Guy, and Anko, part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start a new fanfic. Hiruzen puffed on his pipe, staring deep into the soul of the boy who stood before him. However, instead of fidgeting or trying to avert his heavy gaze, like so many had done before him, the boy remained impassive. He stared right back with a blank look as he awaited whatever punishment awaited him. This surprised Hiruzen greatly and saddened him even more. What kind of treatment did this child have to endure to be able to withstand the gaze of the Hokage? A man so powerful that in the 3 shinobi wars, the mention of his name brought fear into the hearts of his enemies. The old man released smoke in the form of a sigh. He was currently at a loss as to what he should do in this situation. Naruto Uzumaki, a 5-year-old child, now genin of Konoha, had managed to deceive not only the Hokage of his village but a Jonin and several Chunin ninja. Hiruzen was at a loss, but not because he didn't know how he should punish Naruto, but because he didn't know if he should punish Naruto or praise him. Naruto had managed to trick not only an S-ranked shinobi and a hero of 3 wars but a number of other shinobi despite only being 5. He tricked trained shinobi, masters of manipulation and deceit, at 5. While Naruto certainly had done a bad thing, he was acting and thinking like a shinobi. He wanted something and thought he could handle it and wasn't afraid to use underhanded tactics to gain it. While that was certainly bad for a child, it showed great thinking and potential for a ninja. Naruto told him his plan and how he executed it mere moments ago, and he was greatly impressed. While the plan had been very simple, he had covered very base and accounted for a number of foreseeable elements, like him questioning him or Guy questioning if Naruto went on the camping trip. He planned for just about anything his mind could come up with, what excuses to use if he was caught, where he needed to be, when people were going to be where, and so on. If Hiruzen had to guess, he would place Naruto's IQ on par with a Nara, something nearly unheard of. But perhaps it just went to show that Naruto really was Minato's son. Hiruzen's eyes darted over to Kakashi, who was standing just behind Naruto. They made eye contact for a mere moment, but Hiruzen could tell Kakashi was at a loss for what to do as well. While there was a small amount of pride in his eyes, his little brother had just pulled a fast one over the Hokage. It was overshadowed by anger. Kakashi was pissed. Naruto didn't just disobey his orders, but he tossed away whatever childhood he could have had. He gave up playing with his friends for practicing ninjutsu. He gave up getting excited over toys for learning how to wield a weapon. He gave up his innocence for a life filled with sin and bloodshed. So yes, Kakashi was furious. His gaze then turned to Anko, who had shown up with Kakashi. She saw Naruto being dragged to his office and decided to find out what her little brother had done, though she did have a good idea when she saw the headband around Naruto's forehead. Unsurprisingly, Hiruzen saw pride in the woman's eyes. If he couldn't see it in her eyes, then he could in the giant smile she wore. It looked like it was taking all of her willpower not to jump around the room praising Naruto. Her little brother had tricked the Hokage. She hadn't even done that. With a silent chuckle, Hiruzen then looked at Guy, who seemed to have a mixture of emotions of his face. While it was obvious he was both disappointed in himself for being tricked by Naruto and in Naruto for tricking him, he saw pride in there as well. He was proud that his protege's flames of youth burned so brightly. Finally, his eyes returned to Naruto, who still looked at him blankly. However, he could see nervousness and a hint of fear in the young boy's eyes. So Naruto-kun understands what he's done, the Hokage thought, feeling at loss for what he should do. Exhaling smoke, Hiruzen began to speak. Naruto-kun, I'm very disappointed in you, that you would lie to me and Guy. The boy flinched at that, but Hiruzen continued, but you showed very sharp thinking and planning, he said, deciding that honesty would be best. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise at the sudden compliment. Why, you're not mad? He asked in a small voice. Hiruzen breathed in deep, yes and no. I'm disappointed that you plotted instead of asking, but I know I shouldn't be so surprised. You are a child, whether you're a shinobi or not, so I can't expect you to know when and how to use what you've been taught, he said before he leaned forward. However, I now expect you to know better. While what you did was very impressive, Naruto-kun, you used your abilities selfishly and against your village. Had this been something more important than a waiver for the genin exam, I may have had no choice but to execute you for treason, he lied. He would never execute the village's Jinchuriki or a prodigy of Naruto's caliber. However, Naruto didn't need to know that. Naruto flinched again with wide eyes but nodded, understanding just how big of a deal this was. While, as I said, I'm proud of your abilities, next time you should use them to benefit the village instead of yourself. I know you thought yourself ready for the exam, but Kakashi said that you shouldn't take it and you should listen to him. Hiruzen finished his scolding, praising, and leaned back in his chair. While he was in favor of Naruto becoming a genin sooner, if he told Naruto that he shouldn't listen to Kakashi, it would only bring trouble in the future. Do you understand? He asked as he breathed in tobacco once again and got a nod from Naruto. Yeah, I'm sorry Gigi, he said in a dejected tone as he stared down at his sandals. He felt terrible due to the Hokage's words. While Naruto had a vague idea that they were going to be angry, he thought that they would be so impressed that they wouldn't be too mad. Hiruzen smiled lightly, glad that his words had gotten through to Naruto. I forgive you Naruto-kun, however do not do this again, he said before he looked at Kakashi. All of you can leave except for Kakashi, he said, and everyone obeyed his order. Once everyone left, Hiruzen began refilling his pipe. Now that Naruto-kun is a genin, I hereby allow you to retire from Anbu and name Naruto Uzumaki as your apprentice, he said as a flame sparked to life on the tip of his finger that he used to lit his pipe before he waved it out of existence. Kakashi smiled softly beneath his mask. While he was very unhappy with the circumstance, he was happy to finally get out of Anbu and be able to train Naruto without the worry of being in the middle of a lesson only to be called off for a week. Hiruzen picked up a folder of papers that he had delivered to him by Iruka during Naruto's explanation and tossed them to Kakashi. Here are the exam results, he said, and as Kakashi began reading, he began summarizing. Naruto managed to take second in the exam ranking, just under young Levi. He performed very well in taijutsu, where Iruka-kun admitted that his emotions clouded his judgment and he held back less against Naruto, but the boy still passed, Hiruzen commented. While Hiruzen was slightly disappointed in Iruka's behavior, he was proud that the boy owned up to what he had done and managed to remain impartial when grading Naruto. That was more than most could say. Kakashi nodded, skipping to that section and quickly began reading Iruka's notes. After he and Hiruzen finished discussing Naruto's results, they discussed what Kakashi was going to do with the boy. Giving him the real genin exam would be pointless, Kakashi said as he tucked papers back into the folder, it would just be redundant. He tricked both you and Guy, so it's safe to say that he deserves to be a genin. Hiruzen nodded, thinking along the same lines. As for team placements, will you take a genin team or will you work conjointly with other teams? Conjointly, I will remain only Naruto's sensei, but he'll work with the rookie genin, whichever teams pass this year, he responded. While he toyed with the idea of taking a whole genin team, he knew it would be unfair because he would unintentionally favor Naruto. As someone that believed in teamwork, that would be unacceptable. Hiruzen nodded again. Iruka-kun observed that Naruto managed to get along with both the Rookie of the Year, Levi Aburame, and the Kunoichi of the Year, Hana Inazuka. However, Naruto seemed to have gotten into an argument with the dead last, Akito. If the traditional team manages to pass, then I would recommend working with that team. Kakashi hummed in thought, thinking it was a good idea. Naruto would be able to work with talented peers while also learning how to deal with people that he didn't like. While Naruto was usually well-mannered, when someone pressed his buttons, he snapped with the passion of 1,000 suns. Sounds fine to me, Kakashi responded and began to head out the door but was stopped by Hiruzen. Kakashi, I know you're angry with Naruto right now, but try to see things from his view, the old man said, causing Kakashi to swing around, but before he could say anything, he was interrupted. Naruto has had a very hard life despite being so young. Regardless of what you did, who you threatened or blackmailed, Naruto was never going to have a true childhood, Hiruzen said and got an angry glare from Kakashi. You don't know that. He made friends with Uchiha Sasuke not too long ago. He could have made more and spent time with them before he became a shinobi, Kakashi argued. What Naruto still didn't understand was that he wouldn't have nearly as much time to hang out with Sasuke or the other friends he could have made. Now he was going to on missions, chores at the beginning, but in a few months he was going to be out of the village for weeks at a time. It was going to be incredibly hard to maintain his friendship with Sasuke because he was always going to be busy with his training or missions, and Kakashi wasn't going to be as lax as he was when Naruto was an actual shinobi. He wasn't going to let Naruto skip out on a lesson or do something half-assed so he could play with his friends. No, Naruto was now a soldier and he would be trained as such. Slacking off meant death in the shinobi world, and he'd be damned before he let Naruto die. Hiruzen sighed deeply. Perhaps, but Naruto was never going to have the childhood you wanted him to have, he said as he looked Kakashi in the eye. I robbed him of that fate the moment I announced his status to the village. At the time I thought I was following Minato's last request, to have his son be seen as a hero, but I was wrong, he trailed off. It was a mistake. I robbed Naruto of a normal life and condemned him to be hated by the village. Because of this, Naruto has become too mature for his age, so do not blame him for not wanting to be treated as a child when no one has ever treated him as such, Hiruzen finished. Kakashi's glare softened into a regretful look, his anger beginning to dissipate, before he nodded softly and left the room. Naruto was riding on Anko's shoulders as she paraded him through the village. You tricked the Hokage. I'm so freaking proud of you I could die, she said enthusiastically. Her little baby brother and #1 student had pulled a fast one over the Hokage. Such a thing was nearly unthinkable. The old man was a shinobi that lived when the hidden villages were being formed. One simply didn't trick that kind of man. Even she didn't have the guts to try to manipulate him, but Naruto had done it no problem. He had even become a genin to top it all off. Naruto allowed himself a small smile at his Ne-chan's praise, but for the most part he still looked sullen. Guilt for lying to his friends and family was starting to hit after his talk with Gigi. It was one thing to expect to get scolded, but an entirely different thing to be scolded. He looked over at Guy, who was walking beside them. I'm really sorry for lying, Guy-sensei, he said softly, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes, but the eccentric man simply gave him a thumbs up and a smile. It's okay, Naruto-kun. Your flames of youth simply burn too brightly to be withheld, he said as his teeth sparkled. While Guy had been upset that Naruto had tricked him, he quickly forgave his student simply because he understood where Naruto was coming from. The boy's spirit of youth burned too fiercely for anyone to try to keep Naruto from his goal. Naruto looked relieved before he returned the thumbs up and smile, feeling incredibly thankful that Guy didn't hate him. PFF'd. Kakabaka was the only one that was trying to hold him back, Anko scoffed. She thought Naruto was ready at the 6-month mark and Guy thought Naruto had been ready at the 8-month mark, but Kakashi had shut them down every time they brought up the exam. While Anko didn't really care for what Kakashi said, she didn't act out against it either. She couldn't just tell Kakashi where to shove his opinions because she had Naruto to think about. If she and Kakabaka were fighting, and potentially trying to wrestle for custody, Naruto would be heartbroken. So she refrained herself from bringing Naruto to the academy herself to spare the boy's feelings. Oh, how your words wound me, Kakashi said in a sarcastic but flat tone as he appeared and scooped Naruto off Anko's shoulders. The purple-haired Kunoichi gave a surprised cry before looking up and saw that Naruto was in Kakashi's arms, who was giving her an eye smile. I'll be taking Naruto for a bit, see ya later, the masked man said before he and a confused-looking Naruto disappeared Viva Shunshin. Naruto was going to be sick. He knew about the Shunshin Jutsu, a jutsu that Itachi's friend was known for. He never experienced it before. Now that he had, he could honestly say that he didn't like it. Sure, it was a cool jutsu, one he would defiantly master one day, but it was incredibly disorienting to suddenly teleport from the middle of the street to the park in less than a second. Naruto moaned, a greenish tint coloring his skin. Kakashi chuckled despite himself. He had the same reaction when Sensei used the Harashin on him for the first time. He set Naruto down on a nearby bench. The park was practically deserted other than a few children that were swinging on the monkey bars and having a great time. Good. They would help prove his point. Kakashi took a seat next to Naruto, who was slowly returning to a normal hue. Do you see that? He asked as he gestured to the children playing. Naruto, realizing that his scoldings weren't finished, grimaced before he looked over. He saw a boy with triangles on his cheeks, the same boy that hugged Hana's leg, and a girl with blonde hair yelling at him for something. There was also a pink-haired girl, hiding behind the blonde with a scrapped knee. Naruto figured that Hana's brother hurt the pink-haired girl and her friend, Blondie, had gotten angry. Yeah, Naruto said, not sure what he was supposed to be seeing. Kakashi sighed. Naruto, what you did has so many consequences that you don't even know about. Yes, you did an amazing thing, something only a few have ever done, but you sacrificed so many things to obtain that headband, he said as he pointed at the children. Those could be your friends, Naruto, he said, and confused Naruto. Why can't they be my friends now? He asked in a small voice. While he knew that it was incredibly unlikely that they would even want to be friends with him, but he was being hypothetical. Because it's very hard to maintain friendships with civilians. You're a ninja now and it's going to be tough just to maintain your friendship with Sasuke, much less make more friends, Kakashi replied, causing Naruto's brow to furrow. While Naruto was very young, he had a habit of making people fiercely protective and loyal to him. However, it took time to solidify those kinds of bonds, and Naruto would be lacking in time when his training began anew. Me and Sasuke will always be friends, Naruto exclaimed, but his vow was dismissed by Kakashi. Easier said than done. Will your friendship really be as strong as it is now when you haven't seen each other in weeks because of missions? When you're training, he's having fun. Naruto opened his mouth to reply, but he was cut off by Kakashi. I know Sasuke will become a ninja, but that won't be until years from now. If he graduates at the normal time, then it'll be 7 years from now, Kakashi said, making Naruto think. 7 years was a very long time in the eyes of a 5-year-old. Kakashi ran a hand through his hair. I know you don't think yourself as a kid, but you are Naruto. You're a 5-year-old child whether you like it or not, Kakashi would have continued, but it was Naruto's turn to cut him off. But I don't want to be a kid. I want to be a ninja. I don't need to have a childhood. I never had one in the first place. Naruto exclaimed as fire burned in his eyes. Kakashi grimaced behind his mask, the Hokage's words ringing in his skull like a bell. Perhaps that was the reason he wanted Naruto to have a childhood, because he knew Naruto would never had one to begin with. That saddened his even more because he could remember how his sensei and Kushina Nichan envisioned Naruto's childhood. How, according to Kushina, Naruto would be king of the jungle gym, kick Sasuke's doing so, and gain a harem of women. How, according to Minato, Naruto was going to be the kind boy that made sure everyone was having a great time and be surrounded by friends. He could remember how they shared their visions with him, claiming that he would be in every scene, and it made his heart clench. Naruto had none of that. He wasn't king of the jungle gym, he didn't have a harem of women, he was still a bit too young for that anyway, he wasn't surrounded by friends, he didn't have parents. He had a few adoptive siblings and a handful of friends, a far cry from what his parents envisioned. Kakashi hated that, and he wanted Naruto to live out a few of his parents' visions. Perhaps that was the reason why he was desperately fighting this pointless fight. Even if he wanted to change it at this point, he couldn't. Naruto was officially a genin of Konoha, and any semblance to a real childhood had ended the moment he received his headband. Kakashi sighed loudly, his anger dispersing and his will to continue this fight evaporating. I understand that, I was the same way when I was your age. I couldn't stand the fact that everyone treated me as a child when I viewed myself as an adult. He chuckled lightly, trying to end the argument. So, you're not mad anymore? Naruto asked a bit timidly, afraid that his Ni-san was still upset with him. Kakashi shook his head. No. I'm not mad anymore, he said as he patted Naruto's head. There you are. A voice interrupting their bonding moment. Both males looked over and saw a furious-looking Anko that was storming up. When she was a foot away, she grabbed Naruto and returned him to his rightful place on her shoulders before she gave Kakashi a glare. Don't you dare kidnap my Naru-chan again, Kakabaka, she said as she turned away. The, or else, was implied in her glare. While Naruto was trying to make excuses, saying that Kakashi just wanted to talk to him, Kakashi chuckled as he joined the group as he pulled out his orange book. They had a child prodigy, a man wearing neon green spandex, a woman wearing next to nothing, and a man that read porn publicly. Ah, family. What were you two doing anyway? Anko demanded, her hands gripping Naruto's ankles to prevent another kidnapping. Oh, just showing him great literature, he replied as he flipped a page. Anko rolled her eyes in annoyance at Kakashi's blatant lie. It had better been. She didn't really care for Kakashi, despite having Naruto in common. He was just too uncaring for her tastes. While that may seem hypocritical, she cared about a few things: Kurenai, her skills as a kunoichi, her position as to be head of the T&I department, and Naruto. Kakashi, on the other hand, seemed to care only about Naruto. While that's all fine and dandy, he didn't seem to care for anything else. Sometimes she even questioned if he cared for his friends when she saw him repeatedly brush Guy's challenges off. Guy insisted that was simply Kakashi's hip attitude, but Anko wasn't convinced. Naruto didn't notice Anko's reaction to Kakashi's response because he was too busy beaming joy out of every pore. Kakashi didn't hate him. He was forgiven. Now, I think it's time we celebrated Naruto's graduation. He took second in ranking, Kakashi informed as he gave Naruto an eye smile. Anko looked up, causing Naruto to almost lose his balance. What? Second place. That's great. I knew you could do it, she exclaimed, causing Naruto to flush with pride and embarrassment. Yosh. Most excellent, Naruto-kun, Guy exclaimed right after he, giving Naruto another thumbs up and a smile. Kakashi, still eye smiling, said, since today's your day, you get to choose where we eat lunch. Naruto beamed before looking deep in thought. While finding a place to eat wouldn't be a problem, finding a place that would let him in was. Kakashi had bullied the vendors and store owners into letting Naruto shop. Restaurants were still denying his entrance. He didn't care though, since he never ate in them, but now it was a bit of a problem. As if attempting to answer Naruto's question, his nose was suddenly hit by the most delicious, intoxicating aroma that he had ever encountered. Sniffing loudly, he pointed at the source of the smell. Amused, the elder members of the group looked at what Naruto was pointing at, and Kakashi stopped when he saw it. Ichiraku's, the ramen bar that Minato and Kushina ate at nearly every day when they were dating. While Minato had been a ramen lover, Kushina had taken it to a whole different level. Kakashi was certain that one of the main reasons Kushina loved Minato so much was because he made the best miso ramen in, as Kushina claimed, the world. He himself ate here with them often, but he hadn't stepped foot in the bar's direction since they died. Ni-san, hurry up, Naruto yelled back at him, causing him to jerk out of the past and began walking again. The group entered the restaurant and were greeted by a man in his mid-30s. Hello, how can I help you? He greeted as he turned from the cooker, and his eyes widened as he saw who had entered his store. His eyes landed on a much older-looking Kakashi, who was rubbing the back of his bashfully. Well, perhaps older-looking was the wrong word since he couldn't see Kakashi's face, but the boy turned into a man, if that made sense. His eyes landed on the small boy on Anko's, who was barely dressed in his opinion, shoulders. Naruto Uzumaki, the son of his two favorite customers. He smiled lightly as he examined the boy. He had seen Naruto a few times before, but the boy always disappeared before he had a chance to talk to him. The boy looked happy, hungry and nervous. Naruto saw the smile and his nervousness vanished. He had been afraid that the cook would kick him out, but it seems that wasn't the case. The group sat down and Tuki gave them menus, but when he gave Kakashi his, he gave the man a knowing grin. "It's been a while, Kakashi-kun," he commented. Kakashi rubbed the back of his head again and I smiled. "Yeah. I got a little lost on the road to life," he replied, telling the truth for once. "You know my Ni-san?" Naruto asked. Tuki nodded. "Sure do, he used to come here all the time when he was a boy," he said with a smirk, understanding Kakashi's 6-year absence. He took the death of his sensei, the village's Hokage, the hardest by far. However, before Naruto had a chance to ask why Kakashi never showed him this heavenly place, just going by the smell, an auburn-haired girl around 10 years old walked in. "Dad, did we get customers?" A young Ayame asked as she entered from the back room. Her question was pointless when she was that half of their seats were filled. Much to her surprise, she recognized one even though it had been 6 years. "Mask-chan," Ayame said loudly before she made her way up the steps that let her see over the counter easier. Kakashi gave Ayame an eye smile. "Yo, you've grown," he commented, causing the girl to beam. Naruto watched the exchange and an unfamiliar feeling entered his chest, jealousy. "How do you know my Ni-san?" Naruto asked, emphasizing the word my. Seems that Naruto might have been spending too much time with Sasuke. Both Kakashi and Ayame turned at Naruto, but before Kakashi could give an answer, Ayame noticed Naruto's headband. "Are you playing ninja?" she asked in a curious tone. Naruto's eyes narrowed. "I'm not playing ninja. I am one," he said, thinking that it should be obvious that he was a full-fledged ninja. Ayame looked doubtful. "No way. You're way too small to be a ninja. You're younger than I am," she said as she scooted closer to Naruto, dragging the steps with her as she did so. Kakashi was all but forgotten by the two as they argued. "I'm not," Naruto argued with passion. "Too. You couldn't even see over the counter if you weren't sitting," Ayame shot back. Quote. "So, just because I'm small doesn't mean I can't be a ninja. I trained for a year and I took the exam today," Naruto shot back as he pointed to his headband with pride. "I bet they just gave you the headband since you're so small and they felt bad for you," Ayame said, blatantly insulting the boy. She hadn't yet mastered the art of filtering what she said yet. Plus, she found it rather fun teasing the boy. Naruto's brow furrowed. "They did not." "Yeah, they did. You're just too small to be a ninja." "I'm not. Too. Naruto was cut off by Anko throwing her head back in laughter, earning a small glare from Naruto. "What's so funny?" Anko roughly rubbed Naruto's head. The girl's right, you're way too small to be a ninja," she said, taking the unexpected side. "But, enough of that, we haven't ordered yet," she said, officially ending the argument. However, judging from the outrage in Naruto's eyes, the argument was far from over. After ordering their food, Anko got a salty ramen, Guy got miso with menma, and Naruto and Kakashi both got miso with extra pork. They chatted amongst themselves, taking their turns congratulating Naruto, and after they got and ate their food, Naruto seemed to inherit his mother's addiction to ramen and started claiming it to be food fit for a god. The three adults decided it was time to give their gifts to Naruto. While they were going to punish Naruto for breaking their rules and going behind their backs, they decided that they would wait until after today. They weren't going to punish him on the same day he became one of the youngest genin in the history of Konoha. Gifts. Naruto asked in confusion. The word was almost foreign to Naruto. The only gifts he had ever received were Gama-chan, a toad-shaped wallet that someone unknown gave him, and the clothes and food Kakashi gave him. Gifts, Kakashi repeated, hating the confusion in Naruto's eyes, and pulled out a scroll in one of his flak jacket's pouches and handed it to Naruto. Naruto grinned as he unsealed the scroll. Fuinjutsu was way cooler than any wrapping paper. What popped out were more scrolls and a few books. Naruto smiled like a loon as he began reading the titles. He grabbed the first book titled, Fuinjutsu Level 3, Congratulations on not blowing yourself up so far. By Jiraiya. Naruto's smile widened. Jiraiya was, by far, his favorite author. Putting the book down, he continued reading the rest. The next one that he picked up was a scroll titled, Bloody Whirlpool Style. Naruto gulped at the ominous-sounding name but quickly realized that this was the offensive style that complemented the whirlpool dance style. There were a few more books and scrolls about a number of different things but all were shinobi related. Thank you Ni-san. Naruto yelled as he all but threw himself in Kakashi's chest. The one-eyed man chuckled as he patted Naruto's head. Most youthful Kakashi. Now Naruto-kun, take a look at what I've gotten you, Guy said as he jumped out of his seat and out of his ninja pouch he whipped out something that Kakashi feared. A neon orange spandex jumpsuit. Stars twinkled in Naruto's eyes as murder and rage gleamed in Anko and Kakashi's. So cool, Naruto yelled as he jumped out of his seat, proving that he wasn't tall enough to see over the counter by several inches, and ran towards Guy, wanting to put the jumpsuit on this very second. However, thankfully, Kakashi held the boy back and in the split second Naruto turned to look at his Ni-san in confusion, Anko threw a handful of kunai and pierced the offending clothing. It certainly is Naruto but it seems that it needs to go to the tailor before you can wear it, Kakashi said, causing Naruto to look back at Guy. The green-clad ninja was crouching some feet away, anime tears streaming down his face as he drew circles in the ground, looking completely dejected. Next to him, the spandex jumpsuit laid torn to ribbons. Naruto blinked in confusion, he could have sworn that a second ago the jumpsuit looked fine. Yeah, looks like it'll take a while to fix too, Anko commented as both Kakashi and she shared a glance, commending each other for a job well done. Naruto's shoulders slumped, he had been looking forward to wearing the jumpsuit. According to Guy, it would greatly enhance his spirit of youth. Now that was all fine and dandy, feast your eyes on this my cute little bro, Anko said dramatically before she whipped out a scroll and unsealed it. A few books popped out, mostly about infiltration techniques, poisons and pranks but there were a few cookbooks in the mix as well. There was even one about how to conduct tea ceremonies. However, those weren't nearly as attention-grabbing as the life-sized statue of Naruto now standing on the counter. The statue had its hands on its hips as its chest was puffed out, looking incredibly lifelike and heroic. It was amazing in every sense of the word, especially when you considered what it was made of. Panties. This work of art was the reason why Anko sent Naruto into the women bathhouse, not just for training and for giggles, but for building materials as well. Naruto's face burned with embarrassment, causing Anko and Kakashi to laugh. Well, do you leaky it? Anko asked, rolling the word like off her tongue, causing Naruto to redden further. Nei-chan, Naruto whined as he tried to curl up into himself, wanting to just disappear. Anko laughed louder as she rubbed Naruto's head, that's not all. Look, she said before she grabbed the statue and began moving parts so it now looked like Naruto in his Goken stance. It moves, she said gleefully, proud of her work of art. I have to ask, why panties? Kakashi asked, mirth still in his tone. After Naru-chan's first raid on the bathhouse, I had a bunch of useless panties just lying around. I decided to do something constructive with them, she explained with a shrug. Kakashi gave Naruto a lazy look, causing the boy to shrink more. So you're the reason the bathhouse's heightened security, he realized before he too patted Naruto on the head. Ah, they start so young these days, he commented to Anko, getting a laugh from the purple-haired kunoichi. Naruto felt like he was going to die from embarrassment. No, he wanted to die. Hell would be far more kind. Ni-san, Ne-chan, Naruto grumbled. Ah, Naru-chan is blushing, Anko said as she pinched the boy's cheeks, but you do like it right? She asked as she gave his cheeks a threatening pull. She worked hard on that statue, damn it. Naruto nodded his head, unable to speak due to Anko's pinching, causing Anko to beam. Off to the side, Tenchi and Ayame watching the odd family with a bewildered expression on their face. A few days later, Hiruzen let out a very deep sigh, making a mental note that he had been doing so much more often lately. He had just gotten out of a meeting regarding the teams that managed to pass the not-so-secret Genin exam that the Jonin held. 4 teams passed this month. While it wasn't an astounding number, it was a Genin team more than average. Even if it was just a mere 3 Genin, in the situation they were in, Konoha needed every available hand. The traditional top 2 and dead last team managed to pass this year, so that was the team Naruto was going to work with on occasion. He and Kakashi had hammered out more details with Naruto's apprenticeship in the past few days. Naruto would work with Team 13 on D-ranked missions, and once he got enough of those under his belt, he would go on C-ranked missions with them. He would later then be taking C-ranked missions alone with Kakashi when the masked man thought he was ready. Hiruzen chuckled to himself. It would be an interesting year now that Naruto was a ninja. There were very few that ever managed to get themselves apprenticed, and they were always worth keeping an eye on. If Hiruzen remembered correctly, the last ninja apprenticed had been Anko. Hiruzen was drawn away from his thoughts by the sound of his door opening. With a lazy look he saw that it was his once best friend and greatest rival, Danzo. You can come in, Hiruzen commented in a dull tone, commenting on the mont's rudeness. There once was a time that Hiruzen would have been gladdened by his friend's appearance, but now the man simply gave him a headache. They were just too different now. While they always had conflicting personalities, they managed to get along and were as thick as thieves. However, it had been his appointment as Hokage that severed their friendship, and as the paths they walked continued to diverge, their relationship deteriorated further. Hiruzen had inherited the will of fire from his predecessor, the will to protect your friends and home at the cost of your life. There was nothing that Hiruzen wouldn't give for his village, but there were lines that he refused to cross. No. He would, and had, crossed those lines. He was simply more regretful of it. Danzo, however, became strict and militaristic. Hiruzen was positive that Danzo loved Konoha just as much as he did. However, Danzo had become a thorn in Hiruzen's side. There wasn't a line that Danzo wouldn't cross and felt no guilt about it. The man's route program was barbaric at best, pitting children in fights to the death, killing the one they loved most. Raping and murdering innocent men and women to replace them with people more malleable. While some of these things were necessary to protect the village, Danzo took it a step too far. He wanted Konoha on top, to rule over the other hidden villages like they were the dirt he walked on, so he did even more villainous deeds to keep Konoha in the lead. Hiruzen respected his motives, and that was the reason he allowed Root to be continued behind his back. He couldn't afford to be a moralist when there was a threat to the village. However, even when he allowed Danzo's actions to continue unimpeded, it didn't satisfy him. He constantly pushed for Naruto to be placed in his care. To turn the lovable boy into a cold, emotionless weapon, a living example of the word Jinchuriki. Hiruzen would be lying if he said that he hadn't considered it. Danzo walked into Hiruzen's office like he owned the place. I've received word that Uzumaki Naruto passed the Genin exam, he said as he stopped a few feet away. Hiruzen rose an eyebrow. Rather good spies you have, only a few know of that, Hiruzen commented, wondering who he would have to fire to fix that leak. Everyone involved had been sworn to secrecy, and the only liabilities were the children involved. That meant Danzo had spies in the major clans. Danzo didn't respond to that. He was scheduled to take the exam in a month and a half from now. What changed? The one-eyed man continued. While one would think it was foolish to let the Hokage know that he had spies in his cabinet, this was a game between him and Hiruzen. Danzo would plant a spy, gathering as much information as it could before Hiruzen got rid of it. Hiruzen sighed. Looked like he may have to kill someone instead of firing them. Naruto-kun believed himself ready for the Genin exam, he said simply. Danzo rose an eyebrow, prompting Hiruzen to continue. The Hokage paused for a moment, debating if he should tell Danzo the circumstances of Naruto's graduation. Naruto deceived me and several other Jonin and Chunin ranked ninja and took the exam behind our backs, Hiruzen explained. Danzo was going to find out eventually, so might as well tell him now and avoid a fuss. Danzo didn't react the way Hiruzen had been expecting. He had been expecting a demand for Naruto to be placed in his care so he could harness the boy's talent. However, instead of even saying anything, Danzo laughed. Well, laugh wasn't the right word. It was more of a loud chuckle that hinted that it could have been a laugh if it really tried. That was the closest thing to a laugh that Hiruzen come from Danzo in at least 20 years. Hiruzen looked at his once best friend, using all of his shinobi training to not look like a stammering fool. Danzo cleared his throat when he noticed the confusion in Hiruzen's eyes. It's refreshing to hear that there are few shinobi with a spine left, he said with a small stamp of his cane. Hiruzen's eyes narrowed, but he didn't comment. Why are you here, Danzo? I sincerely doubt that you came to discuss Naruto's graduation, he said, his voice adopting an authoritative edge. Danzo paused for a moment, to gather his thoughts and how to word them. I intend to find out what your plan are for the Jinchuriki. I understand he had been named Hitaki's apprentice and you've recalled him from Anbu, but I do not know what you intend from there, Danzo responded, his voice taking an authoritative edge of its own. Another game he liked to play with Hiruzen. It was a subtle one, but since he no longer spared physically, he spared verbally. Hiruzen sighed. So you've come to criticize me withdrawing Kakashi from Anbu, he stated as he pulled his pipe from his sleeve and filled it with tobacco. Whenever Danzo came around, the urge to smoke always came after. You're withdrawing one of our best to mentor a child, a prodigy, admittedly, but our resources could be put to better use. Yes, I would imagine that giving him to you would be a better use of our resources. Hiruzen commented as he lit his pipe. Danzo remained impassive. Yes, I can train the Jinchuriki while Hitaki remains in Anbu, where he is of most use, he responded without pause. He knew his request would be shot down. This was simply a formality for him to see what cards Hiruzen had in his hands. Hiruzen breathed in smoke, annoyed that he was right and Danzo brought this up again. No, he said simply, not offering any further explanation. Danzo's eye narrowed. Usually Hiruzen would play this game with him. You cannot afford to be tender-hearted in this situation, Hiruzen. We are far too weak even after 6 years after the Kyuubi attack, Danzo said, trying to bait Hiruzen into a verbal spar. Do not mistake my actions for tenderness, Danzo. Kakashi and I made a deal and I stuck with it. Had I gone against it, Kakashi would have likely left the village with Naruto in tow. When we did get Naruto back, we would have lost another valuable asset and potentially Naruto's loyalty as well, Hiruzen responded. While it did bother him that he was referring to a human life as an asset or a resource, it was a small price to pay in order to avoid one of Danzo's lectures. Hiruzen did outrank the man and this was his village, but if he didn't play these games with Danzo then he wouldn't just be a thorn in his side. He's become a dagger. Danzo nodded, knowing that would be the likely outcome, and Hiruzen continued, I gave Naruto to Kakashi because, despite the mon's habits, he is one of the strongest ninja in the village and most suited for training Naruto, he said as he blew out a cloud of smoke. My point still stands. Kakashi is one of the strongest, followed by Might Guy, and both are focusing their time on the Jinchuriki. While the Jinchuriki should be made strong, I can do so more efficiently. We cannot allow them to take the average 2 years off to train him, even in their free time, Danzo said, stamping his cane to emphasize his point. Hiruzen repressed a sigh. It seemed his answer hadn't ended their game. However, a thought struck Hiruzen. The Chunin exams are being held in Suna after Kumo, correct? Hiruzen asked, throwing Danzo off with the sudden change in topic. Danzo nodded. Yes, in 8 months from now, he answered. Kumo was hosting them in 2 months, but they wouldn't be sending a Genin team on account tensions were still high after the Hyuga incident a few years ago. Then I purpose a wager. Danzo rose an eyebrow. In 8 months from now, Uzumaki Naruto will participate in the exams. If he does not become Chunin in the exam, I will then give him to you, Hiruzen said in a grave but confident tone. He knew he was playing a very dangerous game, and playing with people's lives, but it was necessary. He needed Danzo off his back, constantly asking for Naruto to be placed in his hands. Not only was it annoying, he was also being pressured by his teammates and advisors. Half of the reason why Naruto had an Anbu guard was because Hiruzen was positive that Danzo would snatch the boy in his sleep. If he won this bet, and he likely would, it would hopefully silence Danzo's complaints and keep him away from the boy. In truth, just about every card was in his hand. The bet was just a formality. Hiruzen knew, with little doubt, that Naruto was going to be a Chunin-level ninja if he continued progressing at his current rate. If anything, his progress would only increase now that Naruto was a genin. Then there was Naruto's ability to abuse shadow clones and the fact Naruto was already at mid to high genin level. If that wasn't already a loaded bet, Hiruzen was a major voice on if Naruto got promoted. The only risk was on the team Naruto was going to be paired with. If they got thrown out in one of the earlier exams, then he would lose the bet. However, Hiruzen would be sure to pair Naruto with the genin team that had the best chance. If it came down to it, he would just create a temporary team just for Naruto. Danzo pressed his lips together and was smirk, and if I lose, he asked, knowing just how loaded the bet was. You will be giving me unofficial reports about every mission your route undertake and you and your accomplices stop asking for Naruto, the Hokage responded. Of course he already had spies in Danzo's route, just like how Danzo had spies in his council. However, they were incomplete and spotty at best. The information he would be getting from Danzo would be far more complete and he needed it. He needed to know who Danzo was making friends with and who he was stabbing in the back. Danzo nodded. I accept your wager upon the condition that Root gets a child out of every orphanage, he replied. While he knew he was likely to lose the bet, there was always a chance and he wanted to get as much out of it as he could. Danzo's interest in the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was beginning to wane. While the boy was most definitely going to be powerful and a useful tool, Danzo knew he didn't necessarily have to step in and take control of his training. In addition, Hiruzen was acting like the Hokage he needed to be, so he didn't have to worry about him being soft on the boy. They had discussed at length of Naruto's role in protecting the village and Danzo knew Hiruzen would use the boy accordingly to protect the village. Hatake would do an excellent job training the Jinchuriki, considering his attachments, and he would teach the boy how to be a shinobi, while he would teach him about the will of fire. He knew Hatake wouldn't be so tender-hearted and shield Naruto from the realities of shinobi. So, either way, he didn't lose. If Hiruzen lost his bet then he would gain a valuable weapon and many more recruits, but if he lost then Konoha gained a valuable weapon and another layer of defense. The same thing he would use him for before he became their sword, the same thing that Hiruzen would eventually turn Naruto into. Without waiting to see if Hiruzen accepted his condition, Danzo dismissed himself and Hiruzen let out a sigh of regret. Anbu, fetch me Kakashi, he said in a flat tone, knowing he was going to get an earful, wondering if he had made a mistake. Naruto yawned loudly as he got out of bed, throwing the covers away and stepping onto the icy cold floor. He rubbed sleep out of his eyes as he made his way to the refrigerator, planning on making one of the recipes from the cookbooks Anko had gotten him. Pushing the booster stool up to the counter, then climbing on said counter and grabbed the book and started to flip through the pages, looking for something that looked tasty. He found something called an omelet. Stepping down from the counter, he began gathering the ingredients, preparing them with experienced ease. While his cuts weren't the cleanest and he had a few eggshells omelet, he was cooking rather well for his age. Naruto yawned again as he poured the mix into a pan and placed it over the stove, stirring so the ingredients would be evenly distributed. He was tired since it was almost 5 o'clock in the morning. He started getting up at this ungodly hour because he was a genin now and Kakashi told him he needed to get used to waking up early and having late nights. It's been a few days since Naruto became a ninja and Naruto found out that he was Kakashi's apprentice. He had been ecstatic. Now he could learn from his Ni-san without the worry that he would have to leave on a mission. They could even go on missions together. Naruto cooked his breakfast as he envisioned himself and Kakashi fighting an army and coming out on top. That wasn't to say he would simply forget about Guy-sensei and Anko nay. He would still be getting lessons from them. Kakashi arranged a schedule for him and while he would be working with him on most days, he would train with Guy and Anko after Kakashi's lessons and have a full day with them on weekends. Since he became a genin, he realized that Kakashi had been right. He had very little free time planned out in his schedule. However, Naruto made sure to find time for Sasuke and Itachi outside of training. He refused to lose the first friend he made that was his age. Naruto flipped his omelet onto a plate and carefully stepped down from his stepladder and went to the table. It was more difficult than it sounded considering how messy his apartment was. It wasn't trash that he had lying around. No, it was ninja tools, scrolls, clothes, papers related to Fuinjutsu, and half a forest worth of leaves. He was still working on mastering the leaf exercise. His apartment was a giant hazard, but Naruto had discovered safe paths to any point in his apartment. While he could just pick everything up, or use his clones too, he didn't simply because he already knew where everything was and that was organized enough for him, even if he did occasionally step on a kunai. He reached his ink-stained table and pushed away a number of failed seals to make room for his plate. He was about to dive into his meal but was stopped at the sound of his door opening. In an instant Naruto was alert and rigid. Jumping down from his chair, he grabbed one of the many weapons that were scattered on his floor. He was ready for battle, a year's worth of training with some of the strongest ninja in the village kicking in. However, it was needless when Naruto saw Kakashi's gravity-defying hair peek out the side of his door. "Oh, you're already up, shame, I was going to scare you," the masked man said, mostly to himself, as he let himself in. He didn't even blink when he saw the mess Naruto's apartment was before he kicked off the wall, then off the kitchen counter and landed next to Naruto. He had found his own safe paths through the minefield. Naruto relaxed when he saw it was his Ni-san and resumed eating his breakfast. "What are you doing here, Kakashi ni? Do you want some?" he asked but got a shake of the head from Kakashi. "No thanks. As for what I'm doing here," he trailed off as he sat down. He had just left the Hokage's office and he hadn't heard good news. To say that he had been a little angry with the Hokage would be like saying that he kinda liked Ika, a massive understatement. He had been. No, he was furious. Naruto had just become a genin and yet the Hokage was already trying to make him a chunin. He understood that Konoha was weakened, but if it would only weaken them further if Naruto was killed on a mission due to his age. Kakashi would only be more furious had he known about Hiruzen's wager. Naruto was strong for his age, stronger than most kids twice his age, but that would only do so much against older shinobi. No matter how hard he trained, he still had the physical makeup of a child. His muscles could only develop so much at his age. He had asked, closer to demand, that the Hokage reconsider, but the old man had remained firm. Naruto was going to participate in the Chunin exams 8 months from now and it was his job to make sure Naruto was ready. He had every available resource to him. He could use any training ground and even pull Guy or Anko from a mission they would be going on to train Naruto. Admittedly, he wasn't likely ever to do that, but he had the ability to, and it spoke how important it was Naruto became a Chunin. Naruto's brow furrowed with worry. Something was bothering Ni-san. Kakashi saw Naruto's concerned look and sighed loudly. You're being nominated for the Chunin exams in 8 months, he said, surprising Naruto greatly. In a moment, a smile devoured Naruto's face. Really? He exclaimed. This was awesome. He just became a genin, but they already thought that he was ready to become Chunin. Kakashi thumped Naruto on the head, mimicking something he saw Itachi do to his own little brother. Don't get excited, if anything you should be crying, he said in a serious yet playful tone. Naruto scowled. Why should I cry? I'ma get promoted, he shot back, rubbing his head tenderly. The Chunin exams are tough, tougher than anything you've ever experienced. To be completely honest, the Chunin exams are tougher than the Junin exam, and the fact you're going to the one in Suna is going to make it that much worse, Kakashi said. Naruto looked puzzled and Kakashi explained further. Suna is known for its harsh Chunin exams since they live in a very harsh place. On average, 1 out of every genin team that takes it dies. Sometimes it's the whole team, Kakashi explained, causing Naruto to gulp. Naruto's confidence had deflated with that knowledge. 1 out of every 3. That was simply ridiculous. Kakashi saw this. So, in order to prepare you, we're not cutting any corners. Say goodbye to free time and getting 8 hours of sleep, Kakashi said as he rubbed a regretful-looking Naruto's head. We have cleaning Miss Saki's garden of weeds, Mr. Taki's fence needs to be repainted, young Tora has escaped again, she's rather elusive for a newborn kitten, the Maki twins needed to be babysat, Hiruzen Sarutobi read off a scroll filled to the brim with D-ranked missions. He would have continued if it weren't for an interruption in the form of a rage-filled cry from a preteen. Hell no, Akito roared, outrage and defiance burning in his eyes. He wasn't having it. He's been stuck doing these lame chores for over a month now. He was done. He thought that now that he was a ninja, he would be getting respectable ninja missions. Not being a farm hand to a perverted old man that kept trying to flirt with his sensei. Akito, show respect to your Hokage and watch your language, Suzuki scolded. She was a woman in her mid-20s with straight black hair, matching black eyes, tan skin and pink lips. She also had a sizable bust and a rump to match. She was a beauty in every sense of the word, looking like she belonged on the cover of a magazine instead of being a shinobi. There was once a time in her life that she considered it, but the ninja life was her dream and she pursued it. Her full name was Suzuki Kampi. She was a Jonin of the Hidden Leaf, but that was a recent milestone in her career. It had taken her a few years longer than most simply because she hadn't specialized in one field, but she wasn't quite a jack of trade. Sure, she was proficient, even above so, in most fields of shinobi. Taijutsu, ninjutsu, genjutsu, kenjutsu, fuinjutsu, weaponry, tracking, stealth and many others. However, despite being proficient in these fields, she wasn't good enough in them to be called a jack of trades. She was more of an extreme dabbler, well-rounded but with the hint of edges. She was the current Jonin sensei of Team 13, another milestone considering how she had always wanted to become a sensei. Her mother had died in childbirth and her father was a shinobi. The closest things she had ever had to siblings were the genin that her father trained before he died in the line of duty during the Third Shinobi War. She wanted to emulate her father and raise the next generation. However, it was not as glamorous as her father made it sound. Hell no, I did not become a ninja to do a bunch of chores for a bunch of lazy idiots who couldn't be bothered to do the simple crap themselves. Gardening, catching a cat, fucking really, Akito raged, earning another sharp look from his sensei, but he didn't care. Akito was orphaned the moment he had been born. His father could have been anyone in 1,000 faces and his mother was a whore in the red light district. She had died after childbirth but not because of complications. His birth had been in a puke and booze-filled alleyway, and when he had entered the world, his mother tried to stagger off, intending to forget all about him, but slipped and hit her head on a wall, killing her. Akito was found and named by a faceless drunk that went out to take a piss and stumbled upon the scene. The man had the conscience to bring Akito to the orphanage and dumped him there before heading on his merry way. The only thing he left with him was a note stating his name written in chicken scratch handwriting on a booze-soaked coupon for Dango. It was in that building he was raised for his entire life, the same building that Naruto spent the first 4 years of his own life. No one wanted him, he had a foul attitude and a mouth to match. However, that didn't matter to him. He didn't need anyone. He was his own man, always had been and always will be. Akito. Enough. Suzuki warned, but Akito just tsked before turning away sharply. Can it jugs, a few naughty words ain't nothing to get your panties in a knot over, he said dismissively. Akito's insult did little to rile Suzuki. She had long gotten used to Akito's nickname for her, but she was beyond embarrassed. He had just been called Jugs, in front of the Hokage. Levi pushed his glasses back to the bridge of his nose before he spoke. Akito-san, you should not speak in such a manner. Why? We are in the presence of the Hokage, our leader, and in the presence of a child, he explained in a flat and logical tone. Levi was the rookie of the year, the first Aburame to be so in several generations. The title usually went to the Uchiha or the Hyuga and the occasional Inuzuka. He was very proud of that accomplishment. While Levi was always calm, collected and calculating, he took great pride in his clan and his insects. As his father claimed, he was a rising star in the shinobi world. No Aburame ever before had his size of a hive or such a large variety of insects at his age. No Aburame before had such large chakra reserves that he, or she, could perform minor jutsu in addition to his clan's techniques. Levi knew what his father said was true simply because his father wasn't the type to lie. Naruto frowned at the mention of his age. He was a ninja now, so age didn't matter. Plus, he was 6 now. Not a child. Naruto's appearance changed in the past month. Since there wasn't shinobi clothing meant for children, Naruto now wore a forest green vest with a hood with a long-sleeved navy blue shirt underneath. His pants were also navy blue with white tape tying them off and black sandals on his feet. He would be wearing his orange jumpsuit that Guy had secretly given him, but Guy made him promise not to wear it in the open for now. It seemed that his spirit of youth wasn't quite ready to handle the enhancement and he would have to wait until he was older. Normally, like any 6-year-old would, Naruto would completely disregard the order, but Naruto followed it to the letter. He didn't want to be scolded again by his Ni-san. Akito sneered, I'll say whatever I want, Bug Boy, and the fact we have a baby on our team is exactly my point. Why should we spend our time babysitting when we already babysit one brat already? The preteen scoffed and earned a twitching eyebrow from Levi. Naruto, however, was much more vocal about his disagreement. I'm not a baby, you jerk. Naruto yelled as he jabbed a finger at Akito. The offender narrowed his eyes. Yeah, are you brat? You're the biggest baby I've ever met. He accused, and a tick mark formed on Naruto's head. I'm not. And you're the biggest jerk I've ever met. Naruto shot back instantly. A tick mark formed on Akito's head as well. What did you say, you shitty brat? I called you a jerk, you idiot. Call me an idiot one more time and a spanking will be the least of your worries. Idiot, idiot, idiot. You're a great, big, dumb, idiot. Naruto yelled as lightning clashed between his and Akito's eyes. I'm gonna smack the shish. Akito started to yell back but was cut off by a fist slamming into the top of his head. As light faded from Akito's eyes and he slumped over unconscious, revealing that it was Hana that knocked him out. A tick mark was formed on her head as well. She never really liked Akito all that much. He acted too much like the male members of her clan, always barking and yapping away but never doing any biting. Hana Inuzuka was the clan heiress of the Inuzuka clan. Like Levi, she took great pride in her clan. She did everything she could to bring honor to her clan even if it's not necessary. Her clan meant everything to her. It was filled with her friends and her family, and she'd give her life for her clan in a heartbeat. However, that was unnecessary, so she settled for becoming the greatest hunter Nin the village had ever seen and permanently engraved the Inuzuka name in the elemental nation's history. However, for now, she was stuck with this idiot that got into arguments with a 6-year-old. Though, it wasn't all bad. She liked her sensei and Levi was alright. Naruto, however, was still the apple of her eye. The boy was simply the cutest, most adorable little thing she had ever seen. He was so cute with his big eyes, his pinch-able cheeks, and let's not forget about that cocky, childish confidence. Naruto sent Hana a grin before he stuck his tongue out at Akito's unconscious form. He didn't like Akito in the slightest. He always made fun of him, calling him baby and brat, making sure Naruto knew that Akito didn't like him either. It bothered him at first. He wanted to be friends with all of his teammates. They were supposed to be like a family. However, when Naruto realized diplomacy failed, no longer cared and was ready and able at all times to send insults right back at Akito. He never started the fights, but by God he would be the one that ended them. Hiruzen sighed loudly as he watched the display. While it wasn't uncommon for the traditional team to argue like this, Team 13 seemed to be worse than most. Hiruzen honestly wondered how this team managed to pass. His eyes flickered to Suzuki, who looked just as exasperated as he was, but quickly dismissed the thoughts that she passed the team just so she could have a genin team. She was a jonin of his village and she knew better. Hana rubbed her sore knuckles. Akito had a hard head. Before she said, "Akito's kinda right though," she admitted, "I'm getting sick of these chores as well." Levi nodded in agreement. "I concur. Why? With our skill set, and our village's precarious position, we should be put to better use and take higher paying missions to bring our village more revenue," he said as he fixed his glasses. Hiruzen looked mildly impressed and just as disturbed. He knew Levi had an incredibly sharp mind for his age, but he was disturbed that if this child could see through the facade they were still showing, who else could? Suzuki's eyes widened before she looked deep in thought. He's right. They're too good to just have them sitting around pulling weeds, but are they ready for AC rank? She wondered as she examined her team. Hana looked eager. Levi looked uncaring. Akito looked unconscious. She didn't bother with Naruto simply because he wasn't technically on her team and it would be up to Kakashi if he was able to tag along. Their teamwork is severely lacking when it comes to Akito, but they seem to already have a poor opinion of him due to the academy, so that's to be expected. However, that might change if they overcome challenges together, she debated with herself. Nothing forged deeper bonds than suffering together. Bonds forged in the flames of war and with the blood of enemies. She tried to replicate the effect with harsh training and teamwork exercises, but it wasn't having a real effect. If anything, it caused the two's opinion of Akito to worsen because of his uncaring attitude and aggressive nature. Then again, for the type of bond and comradeship she was looking for, the genin needed to be placed in a dangerous situation when the only options were working together or death. Her eyes caught a look from the Hokage and he gave her a gentle nod. He understood what was going through Suzuki's mind because he's seen the same look on hundreds of jonin before her. It was a very common mental debate for jonin with their first genin team. Suzuki repressed a sigh. "All right, we'll take AC rank," she said with a hint of a sad tone. She knew it was for the greater good, and unavoidable, but it saddened her a bit that her genin were about to get their first real peek at the real shinobi world. "Hell yeah," Akito yelled as he catapulted up, a broad smile on his face. "Finally a real mission." He yelled as he threw two fists in the air. For once, none of the genin commented on Akito's language simply because they were all agreeing with him. Naruto leapt from building to building with near blinding speed. While he was fast normally, it was like he was trying to reach warp speed. He couldn't help it, however, he was excited. Team 13 was finally going on a real mission. Suzuki, he didn't call her sensei since she didn't teach him, that was Kakashi's job, picked out an awesome sounding mission. They were going to escort a merchant back to the land of tea. just northwest of the Land of Fire. It was a week-long trip, since they were going civilian speed, but Naruto was sure that Kakashi would give the okay. The silver-haired man talked about getting a minor C-rank mission soon to get some experience under his belt as soon as possible. As Naruto neared his usual training ground, he began running out of houses to jump on, so he hopped onto the ground. He raced through the village's streets, dodging and weaving through the civilians like it was a game. If it was one, then he probably would have lost points when he knocked over a cabbage cart. Ah, my cabbage, the man wailed like Naruto had just murdered his firstborn. Sorry, Naruto called out over his shoulder as he rounded a corner but slammed face first into a wall. He fell backwards, holding his nose that he was sure was broken, and groaned in pain. Oh, you okay, kid? The wall asked, causing Naruto to look up in confusion. Since when did walls speak? He saw a man roughly Kakashi's age with black hair that almost reached his shoulders, deeply tanned skin, brown eyes, and a dark jacket with fur around the hood. Asuma looked down at the kid with a confused look. The kid hit him at speeds that were impossible his age. After all, this kid was maybe 6 years old. There was no way for him to have accessed his chakra at that age, but there was no other way for the boy to be moving at such speeds. Then he noticed the headband on the boy's forehead and his brow furrowed further. This kid was a genin. And wasn't his father all about giving the next generation childhoods and lives free of bloodshed? Asuma mentally sneered. He should be so surprised. His father was a hypocrite down to his very core. He was just recalled back to the village due to some of the 12 guardians attempting a coup against the Hokage and daimyo. Nearly all the members being killed during it, and only Asuma and 2 others managed to survive the battle. He wanted to stay by the daimyo's side, to keep the man he slew his comrades for safe, however his father had been insistent. The fact that the daimyo was less than trusting after the debacle didn't help in the slightest. So, here he was, back in Konoha against his will and back under his father's thumb. Though, it wasn't all bad. He got to see Kurenai again, he even gotten her to agree to a date to catch up. He was in the middle of it, she went to powder her nose, whatever that meant, and he was waiting outside of the restaurant they had been eating at. He was going over one of his stories, trying to find the best places to exaggerate, when the boy hit him at speeds you'd think the devil himself was snapping at his heels. Naruto clenched his nose and his wound was quickly healing, and nodded, making a nasally, "Eh-huh." Asuma rubbed the back of his head. "Sorry, about your nose," he said a bit weakly, trying to figure out who this kid was. He knew he's seen him before, but he just couldn't place where. If he was already a ninja, then he was likely from one of the major clans, but the only ones with blonde hair were the Yamanakas, and the only kid they had at the boy's age, as far as he knew, was the clan head's daughter. "It's fine," Naruto dismissed as he wiped any excess blood on his sleeve. "So, what's your name, kid?" Asuma asked, earning a slightly annoyed look from Naruto. Couldn't this guy tell that he was in a hurry? However, Naruto loved meeting new people, hoping he could make a good impression of him before the village got to them, and gave Asuma a thumbs up and a smile. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki. It's a pleasure to meet you," he said as his teeth sparkled in the midday light. Asuma's face remained impassive, but on the inside he seethed anger. So not only did his father make this kid a ninja years before he should even think about the career, but he's going to turn this kid into the village's weapon. How in the hell did Kakashi let this happen? He was one of the ones that stopped Kakashi from raining hell on the village when he was denied the adoption, so he knew how much Kakashi cared for Naruto. So how in the hell did Kakashi allow his father to weaponize Naruto? His anger must have showed when he noticed the sad look pass over the boy's face. Apparently he was unconsciously leaking killing intent. "I'm sorry, he started, but Naruto cut him off. "It was nice meeting you, but I have to find my Ni-san," he said, his bangs hiding his sad eyes, before he took off at warp speed. Asuma stood there feeling like a total. Naruto reached training ground 7 minutes later. He was still upset about the man's scary aura the moment he figured out who he was, but he figured it was to be expected. He was used to people hating him, but it didn't make it hurt less. However, he put the encounter to the back of his mind and entered the clearing, where he saw his Nissan standing. Kakashi ni, he greeted as he skidded to a halt a few feet away, eager to begin today's lesson and ask him if he could go on the mission. Yo, Kakashi greeted as he placed his book back in his ninja pouch, specially designed to protect his favorite book from the elements and hazards of being a ninja. It cost several small fortunes to make, but it was worth every single ryo if it kept precious safe. So what are we learning today? Naruto half asked, half exclaimed. Kakashi gave Naruto an eye smile. Today we're giving you the resistance seal we've been discussing, and for the most part you'll spend the day getting used to that, he said as he unsealed his own set of ink and brushes and ordered Naruto to take off his shirt. Unlike gravity seals or even weights, resistance seals wouldn't stunt Naruto's growth, however it was no less effective. The first level felt like you were running with the wind blowing in your face, the second was a stronger wind blowing. The third level felt like you were running through water, the fourth felt like running through a fast-moving stream. Basically, every odd number was a new type of resistance and every even level was a more difficult version. Naruto grinned as he did what he was instructed and sat down, eagerly awaiting his new seal. The resistance seal was a level 6 seal and it intrigued him immensely. He was still only at level 3, so the seal was far beyond his current reach. He would have to wait a good while before could even hope to decode this seal. Kakashi began placing the seal on the left side of Naruto's chest. Normally you would place it on your stomach, but that spot was already taken. Naruto felt the difference the moment he final touches were made and it activated. He didn't feel any wind blowing in his face, but every time he moved with the same difficulty as if there was a strong wind. Naruto grinned. "So cool," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. Fuinjutsu was by far the greatest ninja art. Kakashi gave Naruto an eye smile. "Glad you think so. Now, make me 30 clones," he commanded. He raised the maximum number of clones when Naruto became a genin. Naruto was already counting his not-so-secret training sessions, making closer to 30 clones anyway. Silently, Naruto crossed his fingers and the clearing was filled with copies of the original. Good. Now, the clones come with me while the original runs 5 laps around the village. Naruto's reaction wasn't one that you would expect. Yosh. If I can't run 5 laps, then I'll do 20 using nothing but my hands. He vowed to himself before he took off, his clones wishing him luck. Kakashi turned back to the clones, after making his own shadow clone to watch over Naruto. "Now for you guys," he said before he began counting, "the 15 of you will be working on your chakra control. The first 5 will be working on the leaf exercise while the rest of you water walk," he commanded, and the clones went off to obey the order. Unlike most clones, they weren't grumbling about how their creator was lazy since Naruto was working harder than them. It was a very rare occurrence. "Now, for the other 15, 5 of you will be working with me on taijutsu, another 5 will be working on your new kenjutsu style, the bloody whirlpool style, and the last 5 will be working on weapon throwing," he instructed before going into further detail about how exactly they will be training. As the clones got to work, Kakashi truly appreciated just how broken of a jutsu the shadow clone jutsu was. It was complexly unique and well worth its massive chakra cost. Unlike elemental clones, the shadow clones were a complete copy of the creator. They had internal organs, blood vessels, chakra network, muscle, and, most importantly, the same brain. Normal clones didn't have that. A water clone was just water in the shape if the creator, and a mud clone was just mud. It was because of that seemingly minor difference that the jutsu had such amazing abilities. The reason why it was able to transfer memories to the original was because they had the exact same brain makeup. They had the same synapses, the same neurons, so when the clone was dispelled, it tricked the creator's brain into thinking that it had done what the clones did. It was the same with muscle training. While the clones couldn't send muscle to the creator, they could send muscle memory. That was for the same reason why the clone sent the memories. It tricked the user's muscles into thinking that they were the ones that went through the motions thousands of times. The only real drawbacks were the fact that the clones dispelled with a few good hits. That was because, as complete of a clone it was, they were made of chakra and couldn't maintain their shape once popped. To get a visual, think of a balloon being popped and the air escaping. Same basic idea. The other was the fact that the clones could royally screw the creator. Clones were lazy. They didn't like the fact that they had been created for the sole purpose of doing the things the creator didn't want to do. So, they sometimes half-assed things. That was bad because if Naruto's clones half-assed learning how to kick, when Naruto dispelled them, Naruto's muscle memory would be telling him to do a half-assed kick. Another potential problem could have arisen, but it had been quelled before it even began. When the second Hokage made the jutsu, he made the clones pre-programmed with the knowledge that they weren't the original. If he hadn't done that, then the clones would be fighting their boss for the title of the creator, and the army of clones you just created were now against you. Shaking his head at the jutsu, thinking that the second Hokage had been a brilliant man for creating such a jutsu, he whipped out his book and resumed reading. Though, he did keep an eye on the clones to make sure they were doing the job right. Foo foo foo, oh, what a naughty girl you are, Azumo-chan, he thought, thankful for his mask hiding his reddened cheeks. Naruto collapsed. He was done, and dear God, he was glad for it. It had taken him 8.5 hours to finish, but he did it. The first 4 hours were him running around the village. While Naruto would be extremely hard-pressed to complete such a challenge even on his best day, and the resistance seal made it so much worse. After that, then they continued his physical training with repetitive punches, kicks, squats, push-ups, pull-ups and sit-ups. He got a number of breaks during his training, but that didn't stop everything from hurting down to the last millimeter. With a grunt, Naruto turned onto his back and let the cold night air cool him. It was nearing 10 o'clock and he was getting sleepy. So you're finally done? Kakashi asked as he walked up, amused by the sight of the devilish-looking Naruto. It looked like he had been dragged from Konoha to Iwa and back again, hitting every bump and briar patch on the way. Naruto grunted with half-lidded eyes before they snapped open. The mission. He forgot about asking permission for the mission. Kakashi ni. Naruto started but was cut off by a hand from Kakashi. You can go, he said with an eye smile. Suzuki approached him hours ago and they discussed her plan, putting her genin in a dangerous situation so they would bond. Despite sounding so, well, dangerous and stupid, it was a commonly used plan for Jonin senseis with problem teams. As sad as it was, nothing formed deeper bonds than near-death experiences. Suzuki had personally asked him to come because she wanted to make sure things didn't go south. She admitted she only gotten the rank Jonin by the skin of her teeth and didn't want to risk the kids' lives in the off chance she got over her head. Kakashi respected that and agreed, and they discussed the route for the trip tomorrow and agreed on a certain highway. It was a highway known for its bandit activity. Konoha cleared the stretch of road at least twice every year, but the bandits proved to be cockroaches and kept popping up no matter how many times they squashed them. They stayed with that stretch of road because it was a popular trade route. It ran through several big cities between the land of earth and the land of fire. It was always ripe with travelers and merchants, so the threat of Shinobi did little to frighten them. Despite Naruto's exhaustion, Naruto grinned. Really? Awesome. All go pack. Naruto said before excitement quickly wore off and he slumped over asleep. Kakashi chuckled as he picked Naruto up. You can come out now, Akito. Naruto's asleep, he said, calling out into the dark forest. Seconds later, a scowling Akito entered the clearing with crossed arms. Kakashi, or rather his clone, caught Akito following Naruto after his fourth lap. The boy didn't seem to have an unhealthy motive, and Kakashi already had an idea why Akito was following Naruto. He pushed himself to the point of collapsing, but don't worry. He'll be okay for the mission tomorrow, Kakashi said as he gave the brown-haired boy an eye smile. Akito sneered as he rolled his eyes, but seconds later his features softened. Are you really going to bring him on the mission tomorrow? Akito asked in a guarded tone, causing Kakashi to raise an eyebrow. Is there a reason he shouldn't? Akito sneered again. I'm not stupid, Cyclops. I know that Jugs picked the mission that had a good chance for bandits. Some bullshit about bonds and garbage, he said dismissively and earned a surprised look from Kakashi. Ah, seems like there's more to you than meets the eye, Akito, Kakashi thought before he decided to fake obliviousness. Very astute of you, Aki-kun, however, I still don't see your point. Akito fidgeted before he let out his worries in a slew of words. Don't you think he's a bit too young for that shit? Killing and stuff. Kakashi smiled beneath his mask. He was right. Akito cared more than he let on. Yes, I do, Kakashi admitted. However, Naruto's a ninja before he's a child, he replied as he began to walk, but as he passed the conflicted-looking Akito, he continued, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let him do the killing stuff anytime soon, he said before he disappeared into the woods. Akito returned to the orphanage minutes later, laying in bed but not sleeping, the sliver-haired monk's words reverberating in his mind. Naruto awoke feeling completely refreshed. It was thanks to his healing ability, his Uzumaki genes, and the ability being augmented by the Kyuubi. His ability was Neon Regeneration. Cuts and gashes healed in seconds, broken bones healed in hours, and, though he hoped he never had to find out, missing limbs regenerated in days. He was immune to all poisons and toxins, something that had been tested by Anko and the villagers. Anko was trying to build up his immunity. It didn't matter how strong you were when you were injected with an antidote-less venom. However, her efforts were pointless to her surprise. Naruto's reaction to poison strong enough to kill him several times over, this was after she was sure he was immune to most poisons of course, was that he had to use the restroom for an hour or two. He yawned loudly, struggling to recall yesterday's events, but a huge smile found its way on his face when he did. Today was the day of his first real mission. He was going to see the outside world for the first time. Throwing off his covers, he jumped out of bed. His clock said it was only 6 o'clock in the morning, so that meant he had 2 hours to prepare. Plenty of time due to the fact that he always had a pack filled with necessities ready to go at any time. The only thing he had to pack was a few more sets of clothes and a few other odds and ends. Naruto grabbed his clothes from the various piles they were in and sealed them in a scroll before tucking said scroll in his kunai pouch. Sighing contently, he walked out his apartment and went to get some breakfast at Ichiraku's. He knew it probably wasn't the healthiest of breakfast, but he couldn't care less. Ramen was food for the gods. Nothing could compare to the heaven that was ramen, nothing. He arrived at the ramen bar minutes later and climbed up his favorite stool. It spun and gave him a clear view of the kitchen. Ah, Naruto-kun, you're the first customer of the day, Tsuki said with a kind smile, remembering how Kushina had always been his first customer every day when she didn't have missions. Naruto grinned. Can I have 2 miso with egg and 1 with pork, please? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Naruto ate here every morning he could. He missed some days because of training, but he ate here at least 3 days out of every week. While Kakashi and Anko warned him about how unhealthy ramen was, he couldn't stop himself. It was so good. As Tsuki went to work, Ayame walked out of the back room, yawning loudly. After clearing sleep from her eyes, she opened them and saw Naruto was yet again having ramen for breakfast. Hey shorty, Ayame greeted, refusing to let the fact Naruto was short go. She now knew Naruto was a legitimate ninja, of course, but that didn't mean she was going to give up teasing the boy. He was so much fun and she always got an amusing reaction. Naruto puffed out his cheeks as he narrowed his eyes. I'm not short, he grumbled, but Ayame disagreed wholeheartedly. Yes you are. Before Ayame and Naruto's argument could begin, as it always did, Tsuki placed the bowls of ramen in front of Naruto. He offered the boy a wink as Naruto broke apart his chopsticks. Don't mind her comments, Naruto-kun. I slipped something in that'll help you grow, he said, and Naruto smiled as he took his first bite. Tsuki had slipped in a multivitamin that melted in the broth. It was top-of-the-shelf stuff too, but the cost was well worth it. Naruto had already taken the place of his favorite customer, and that he was the son of his past favorite customers only helped. After Naruto finished off his breakfast, at a near record-breaking speed, he paid for his meal and waved goodbye at the two. He liked Tsuki and Ayame, even if she did call him short. He counted them as his friends, and they were the ones that made it where he couldn't count all of his friends on two hands. He had cried tears of joy when he realized that. Anyway, Naruto was off to the main gate. It was nearing 8 o'clock, so Naruto figured he should start heading over. During his trip, he ran into Levi. Hey, Levi, Naruto called out as he picked up his speed. These steps for every one Levi took. The stoic teenager turned around. Uzumaki-san, how are you? He inquired in a flat tone. At first, Levi's stoicism threw Naruto off. While he liked to think himself a good judge of character, he couldn't tell what kind of person Levi was. He couldn't tell if the Aburame didn't like him or if he simply treated everyone with a cold indifference. However, as the month passed and they began to work together, Naruto liked to think that Levi was another one of his friends. He was still stoic as ever, but he wasn't as short-answered with him as he was, for example, Akito. Naruto smiled. I'm good. I got to eat at Ichiraku's this morning, he replied, trying to engage the Aburame in small talk. Levi fixed his glasses. You shouldn't eat so much ramen, Uzumaki-san. Why? It is highly unhealthy for you due to the fact it is high in sodium and offers very little in nutrition. Naruto rolled his eyes. You sound just like Kakashi ni and Anko ne, he muttered in mild annoyance. He took personal offense when someone insulted ramen. Perhaps I sound like them because we are right, Levi said with an indifferent shrug. Deciding to switch the topic, so his ramen would have to suffer any more insults. So you ready for the mission? Naruto asked, noting the backpack on Levi's shoulders. Why people didn't simply seal their stuff in scrolls, like he did, was beyond him. Levi nodded. I have packed all the essentials. Naruto floundered for a moment. It was incredibly hard to keep a conversation going with this guy. However, his efforts were not needed, for they had arrived at the village's gates. Took you too long enough, Akito muttered as he narrowed his eyes. Levi and Naruto both rose an eyebrow, surprised at the fact that Akito was the one that arrived before them. How surprising that you are here before us. Why? You have a history of showing up late, Levi commented as he took his place next to Suzuki. They were waiting for their client to show up. Akito rolled his eyes. That was in the academy. I couldn't care less about that, but this is a mission. It's different, he replied with a shrug. Hana, who stood next to Akito, gave a nod of approval, understanding Akito's reasoning. The academy had been so boring that she had been more than tempted to skip a few times, though she never did because she knew she'd get caught. Her mother had an uncanny ability to catch her when she did something, no matter what it was. Naruto chuckled. They didn't know the meaning of late until they experienced Kakashi-ni's abilities. While he was usually on time for him, Naruto soon figured out that he was, at minimum, 2 hours late for anything else. Suzuki saw this and sent Naruto a smirk. I told Kakashi that we were leaving at 6, she informed, causing Naruto to burst in speals of giggles. Apparently someone other than him understood his Nissan's antics. Suzuki rose an eyebrow as she examined the giggling boy. She wasn't going to lie. When the Hokage told her that she and her team would be working conjointly with the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, she had been unhappy. She trusted the fourth's sealing abilities. He had been a renowned master after all. Her reservations came from his mental health. She dabbled in psychology and she knew that due to his treatment from the village he was likely to become apathetic, if not murderous. She didn't want him around her team simply because your genin team became your second family. They were the ones you shed blood, sweat, and tears with, and you became very close in that year or two you spent together. She didn't want her team to have any attachments to Naruto when he likely snapped. Not only would they be villainized by association, but it would have the same effect as a family member snapping and becoming a serial killer. However, in the past month, she slowly got to know Naruto and her worries diminished. The boy seemed to have a very sound mind despite his treatment from the village. She would keep an eye on him just to be sure, but she didn't feel as many reservations when it came to the boy. Minutes later, at exactly 8 o'clock, their client and a mildly miffed-looking Kakashi strolled up to the village's gate. Their client was a jolly-looking man, thick around the waist and rosy red cheeks. The image was only enhanced by the happy smile adorned on his face as he walked up. "Hello Kampi-san, Aburame-san, Inazuka-san, Akito-san, and Uzumaki-san," he greeted them each in turn with a small bow. Suzuki smiled lightly, thinking that it was a good thing that their client for her team's first real mission was a good man. "Hello Maski-san, I hope you are ready for the trip," she replied. Maski was a merchant from the land of tea, a rather good one if you believe the rumors. He inherited his business from his parents, who were retired shinobi. He learned much from them before they passed away and left the business to him. Originally, it was only importing and exporting tea, nothing glamorous nor impressive, but that changed when he used his parents' teachings in business. He was ruthless and didn't hesitate to use underhanded tactics nor the use of violence to drive out his competition. He had dozens, if not hundreds, of contacts throughout the crime world. However, none of this could be proven since he used hundreds of aliases and decoys. Since then his business took off. He was now one of the leading exporters in the land of tea. Instead of selling simple tea, he now sold luxury items, antiques, exotic animals, weapons and so many more. No one even suspected him in these illegal dealings. After all, who would suspect the man that looked like Santa to be an international crime lord? Maski slapped his belly in mirth. "Why, of course I am. This isn't my first time traveling, you know," the man said with a smile, which everyone returned. The man's smile was infectious. Suzuki felt a flash of guilt for endangering the jolly man, but she vowed for him not to come to any harm. It wasn't likely anyway since they had the copycat ninja and 4 genin protecting the man from simple bandits. Suzuki then turned and aimed her smile at Kakashi. "It's also good to see you on time, Hataki-san," she said, and Kakashi gave her an eye smile in return. "Oh, it seems that the road of life just happened to bring me by here," he responded, vowing to be at least 4 hours late for anything that involved the women. He hated being manipulated. Suzuki turned to her genin. "Now, all of you have everything, correct?" she asked and got nods from everyone, but her eyes narrowed when she saw the lack of a backpack on Naruto. However, before she could even ask, Naruto answered, "Fuinjutsu," he said simply, and Suzuki nodded before the 7 of them headed out. However, as they began to leave the village, a voice stopped them. "Naruto," a voice that belonged to a child called out, causing everyone to turn around. When they did, they saw Sasuke and Itachi Uchiha standing at the village gate. "Sasuke." Naruto muttered in a surprised tone, not sure why his friend was here. "I heard you were going on your first real mission, so I asked Ni-san if I could see you off," Sasuke explained with a hint of a nervous smile. He hadn't seen much of his only friend lately and he was beginning to worry. Did Naruto not want to be friends with him anymore? Did he do something wrong? Or was just shinobi duties that kept them apart? Naruto looked confused for a moment before a face-consuming grin found its way on his face. "Really?" Though he knew his friend wasn't lying. Sasuke smiled back and nodded, and Naruto felt relief wash over him. He had thought a lot about Kakashi's words, how his friendship with Sasuke would be strained because of his career. He tried to make time to play with his friend, he really did. He tried finishing his training early, but he was always too tired afterwards to do anything other than sleep. He tried to play with Sasuke during Anko Nei's training sessions, when they would play hide and seek, but she always caught him moments after he arrived. Nothing was working and Naruto was beginning to understand Kakashi's words. His friendship was losing its strength quickly, but what could he do? He couldn't be in two places at once. The thought struck Naruto like a sack filled with bricks. Slowly, his signature grin tugged at his lips as he took out one of his numerous scrolls and handed it to Sasuke. The black-haired boy looked confused for a moment and Naruto told him his plan. "There's a couple of my shadow clones in the scroll," he explained. Ever since his first fight with Itachi, he always kept a few clones that were hanged into ninja weapons in a scroll. Sasuke still looked confused, so Naruto continued, "I get the memories from my clones and their copies from me. I can't play, since I have ninja stuff to do, but you can play with my clones. Same basic thing though, they pop if you get too rough with them," he explained. Sasuke paused before a joyful smile replaced confusion and he took the scroll from Naruto. "I'm not sure how many are in there, but it should be enough until I get back." Sasuke nodded and tucked the scroll into his pocket as the onlookers smiled at the display of friendship. However, it was Itachi who broke up the bonding moment out of necessity. "Come, little brother. Naruto must leave for his mission," he said as he placed a hand on Sasuke's shoulder, causing the boy to nod. "Okay, Ni-san, bye Naruto," Sasuke said as Naruto resumed walking away, waving bye. "See ya, Sasuke." Naruto returned as he took his first steps out of the village, officially becoming a traveler. Kuretsuchi silently and effectively loaded her backpack with necessities for a week-long mission. Her objective was only 3 days away, but the actual mission would take 4 days to complete. Her, and her team, would be eliminating the bandits that have been terrorizing one of the major roads that lead to the land of tea, and near her home, the land of earth. Usually, this mission was given to Konoha, but it was given to Iwa instead. Apparently the client was getting tired of having to pay for the same mission twice a year. Iwa, always wanting to show up Konoha, took the mission and were going to quell the bandits permanently. It was a 3-day trip at Shinobi speeds, but they would be spending a minimum of 4 more days clearing out every group of bandits near the highway, making sure they never dared to return. It was her first mission of this nature. Kuretsuchi had been a ninja for a year, but her sensei, and father, wanted to hold off getting his baby girl's hands soaked in blood. She was only 8 years old after all. Her team wouldn't be working alone either, 2 more teams were accompanying them. One was an experienced genin team, a year old like them, but they had dozens of these kinds of missions beneath their belts. The other team was a fresh genin team, barely 3 months old before their sensei volunteered for the mission. Some would say that was a bit soon, however. Iwa wasn't Konoha and they didn't believe giving their future soldiers a childhood. If they were going to be shinobi, then they should be raised as shinobi. Her grandfather, the Tsuchikage, decided that he had held off long enough and gave him this mission to complete. Kuretsuchi double-checked everything before she threw her pack onto her shoulders and walked out her home, joining her father that waited outside. "Hey Pops," she greeted, causing her father to scowl, amusing her immensely. "We're going on a mission, Kuretsuchi. You will refer to me as sensei," he scolded half-heartedly. It didn't expect his daughter to change, nor did he want her to. She reminded him greatly of his late wife, who was killed in the Third Shinobi War. "Sorry, Pops Sensei," Kuretsuchi amended with a smile, causing a rueful grin to plant itself onto her father's face. It was a hobby of hers to call strong people rude names, simply because of their hilarious reactions. When she called her grandpa old, he always sputtered in disbelief. He was a man that fought Madara Uchiha and survived. He was still one of the strongest men in the world. However, it was due to those facts that when an 8-year-old girl called him old and wrinkly, he was at a complete loss. The duo arrived at the village's gates and saw the other members of their team. There was a blonde with hair that covered his left eye. Deidara was average height for a 10-year-old, but his attitude was twice as arrogant as any child. He always ranted and preached about how great art was and was constantly blowing things up. Kuretsuchi's other teammate was the polar opposite. Akatsuchi was a large, and a bit thick, 11-year-old that was as kind and loyal as you could be. He never raised his voice, except when you made a comment about his weight, and would spit in the eye of the devil himself to protect a friend. Hey Kuro-chan, Deidara greeted and was backed by, Hey Kuretsuchi, Akatsuchi greeted. Despite Deidara's usual hyper greeting, both boys looked somber. They knew what they were about to do, and while they felt proud they were about to go through the blooding, getting your first kill and becoming true shinobi, they felt a pit in their stomach. Hey guys, she greeted in the same somber tone. Despite her earlier teasing, she felt the same pit of nervousness and trepidation. Kitsuchi watched his genin and let out a soft sigh. Alright, if all of you have everything, let's hit the road, he said before they, and the other two teams, sprinted through the gates. Naruto munched on something. He wasn't sure what it was now. In the beginning it was a salamander, a big one too, but now it looked like a blackened charcoal lump on a stick. It tasted okay enough, especially when you considered that at one point of Naruto's life he was drinking milk extra chunky. So, anything better than that was decent. This thing is straight up charcoal. Meat isn't supposed to be crunchy. Akito complained as he started to toss away his meal, but it was caught by Naruto. How do you suck this much as cooking? Or, better yet, why in the hell did you offer when you suck this much? Akito wondered sarcastically as he sent a glare at Hana. Hana narrowed her eyes and growled. Being supported by the three Heimaru brothers, the three canines that were her companions, shut it Akito, she growled. She didn't need to feel any more embarrassed. Her mother always said that she had no talent in the kitchen, but she always tried to prove her wrong. That's why she took the opportunity to cook every chance she got. It was her first chance on the 5th day on their 7-day trip. Everyone up until then had prepared their own small breakfast, and lunch typically consisted of things you can eat while on the move, and dinner was a meal you prepared yourself. However, as they were walking they stumbled upon the salamanders and decided to eat them for a change of pace. Naruto seems to like them, she shot back, her pride mending itself at the fact. Akito turned to get a look at Naruto and nearly burst out laughing when he did. The mostly blonde boy was taking alternating bites from his salamander sticks, unable to decide which one he liked best. He was tearing into the sticks, but at the same time he was perfectly reserved. He ate like a wild animal, but at the same time he was perfectly tame. No food was flying everywhere, nor was there a mess, yet he looked like a starving animal that hadn't seen food in weeks. It was a truly amazing sight. However, it wasn't enough to keep Akito from mocking the both of them. That's because he doesn't have any taste buds. How else could he eat ramen? All the don't you dare insult ramen. Naruto interrupted with a mouth full of food. He glared and Akito met